Wait, we haven't gone live. Wait for a few. Okay. Yeah, Sugandha, you can begin. Good to go.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sugandha Tandon, and I am a research assistant at Institute of Chinese Studies. I welcome you all to today's edition of ICS Wednesday seminar. The topic under discussion is missiles under the 38th parallel, implications for East Asia. With North Korea launching a record number of missiles in the recent weeks, the security situation on the Korean Peninsula has once again become highly tense. Recent events reflect a complete breakdown of the peace processes that were set in motion in 2018. This current situation in Korean Peninsula is all the more alarming because on one hand, there is a heightened regional security tension in East Asia. And on the other hand, the strategic rivalry between US and China is intensified. Therefore, this seminar aims to evaluate the recent developments on the Korean Peninsula and their implication for East Asia. Our speakers for today is Professor Vijayanti Raghavan, who is the former professor and chairperson of Korean Language and Culture at the Center of Korean Studies, GNU. She has played a significant role in setting up the Center for Korean Studies in GNU, for which she was awarded by the Prime Minister of the Republic of Korea in 2015. Our second speaker for today is Dr. Jojin V. John, who is an assistant professor of School of International Relations and Politics at Mahatma Gandhi University, Kerala. He was associated with ICWA as a research fellow. He has several publications to his credit that appeared in academic journals, including China Report, India Quarterly, and Area Studies. Joining us as chair is Ambassador Skand Ranjan Tayal, who is the chairman of India and Republic of Korea Friendship Society. He was the ambassador of India to the Republic of Korea during 2008-2011. Ambassador Tayal has broad experience in both bilateral and multilateral diplomacy and has been a frequent speaker on contemporary affairs. He regularly writes for academic journals and Asian Age. A very warm welcome to all of you. Before I hand over to the chair, I would like to apprise you of a few housekeeping rules. Please stay muted throughout the presentation. Questions can be posted in the chat box throughout the presentation, or you can use the raise hand option during the question and answer session. Please unmute yourself only when called upon by the chair to do so. I hand over to you, Ambassador Tayal.
Thank you very much, Sugandha, for that introduction and posing the topic of the day in 2-3 sentences, very in a succinct manner. Now, of course, the 2018 agreements or understandings between the United States mainly and North Korea seem to be over, as one of the major components was that no major joint military exercises between South Korea and the United States, and no missile launches by North Korea. The only component which is left is that there has not yet been the nuclear test, another nuclear test by North Korea. Now one can explore this flurry of missile tests by North Korea in several ways. 2018 there was no test, 2024 test, 2021 8, and 2022 already there are almost 80 missile tests, and one is losing the count. So, but looking at the timeline, why Chairman Kim Jong-un is doing it, one could note some developments which are both in Northeast Asia and global. November 2020, President Donald Trump lost the election, and President Joe Biden then changed the policy towards North Korea, and all the understandings were really not followed up. Then 24th February 2022, Russian invasion of Ukraine. when a nuclear weapon power again attacked a non-nuclear weapon power and is getting away with it. Like the United States got away with attacking Libya and Iraq and in many ways even Syria. Then March 2022, President Yoon Suk Yeol, who is the right of the center, and President Moon Jae-in era is of sunshine policy of some sort is temporarily over. I say temporarily because the National Assembly in South Korea is still with the Democratic Party, left of the center. And what we have witnessed in the last 20 years or so is that presidents keep changing in South Korea, sometimes left of the center, Democratic Party in some form followers of the Sunshine Policy, and right of the center, Senri Party, going very more hostile towards North Korea. Then, of course, there is a total freeze on any US-North Korea dialogue, and the sanctions are in place. Sanctions are hurting North Korea. Then in this timeline, one more very important factor is the 9 September 2022 new law on preventive nuclear strikes, which was passed by North Korea, and which I quote, North Korea can use nuclear weapons in case of a nuclear or non-nuclear attack by hostile forces on the state leadership and the command organization of the state's nuclear forces, unquote. And the chairman, Kim Jong-un, clearly said that the nuclear status of North Korea is now irreversible. And then, of course, we know that vigilant storm exercise is going on, etc. What are the objectives? The second, so the timing, why timing? And the second set of questions which our speakers may explore is what are the objectives of this flurry of tests? One, and these declarations, one very clearly perhaps says that in the next round of negotiations, whenever that happens, between the United States or in the UN auspices or wherever, North Korea will say that it is already a nuclear weapons power and denuclearization is not on the agenda. And even the South Korean press is now writing that the agenda will be arms control, not denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula. Then the second set of objectives seems to be clear that North Korea is aiming at a credible deterrence, not just a deterrence which is hidden or which is not very reliable, that they have tested tactical short-range missiles threatening the 28,000 US troops in Korea. They have tested irregular trajectory missiles on 4 September that would make it very difficult for the Patriot and other anti-missile systems to track these missiles. Then IRBM over Japan on 8 October, submarine-launched missiles apparently have been tested, ICBMs have been tested. And then finally, that 2nd November, am I audible now? Yeah, okay. So I think my Zoom link suddenly went off. Anyway, so now another set of queries could be around that how does China look at it? The whole missile testing and maybe a possible nuclear test may happen. And is China trying to restrain North Korea or not really? Because it is a good instrument to needle United States in the current state of relations between the US and China. But a question which always comes to my mind is that from where does North Korea get all this technical capacity, computer power, you need very sophisticated composite materials, very highly sophisticated metallurgical things, supercomputers for trajectory and tracking, fuel for so many missiles. From where is it coming? Is it all indigenous? Then for a very small country under such sanctions for a very long time, it is quite an achievement. And is China really encouraging or discouraging North Korea? Frankly, I am not very clear. Then the next set of issues could be around response of South Korea and Japan. And after firing of the missile across NLL, perhaps that September 2018 agreement between North Korea and South Korea to lower tension in the Korean Peninsula seems to have come under questioning. And South Korea wants to follow that. Is that in tatters already? Can South Korea have a direct line with North Korea under the present dispensation? Or they will just follow whatever the United States is doing? And of course, this question is already being raised in South Korea, that does South Korea need an independent deterrence against North Korea? And anti-missile defense systems, more South Korea may have to deploy, and what happens whether THAAD will come again. And similarly for Japan, that for Japan is really the China, or aggressive China is the major security concern. Then in that entire scenario in Northeast Asia, where does the threat from North Korea figure, and how is that perceived by the Japanese? And this impact of this entire scenario on stability, peace in Indo-Pacific, and the strategic balance in Indo-Pacific. So to explore all these questions, we have two very good speakers, and I invite first Professor Jayanti Raghavan. Please go ahead, 15 to 20 minutes, and please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Tayal. For agreeing to chair when you're not well, despite that. B, for you've painted a really large canvas of all the issues that are relevant today and that have come up to the forefront because of the situation on the Korean Peninsula and North Korea's missile testing. I will not take very long. I'll try and address as many of those issues as I can, and the remaining, of course, Jojin will take it from there about the implications elsewhere. Yes, this is a very, very grave situation. Not that we've not had such situations in the past, considering that North Korea has already tested 6 nuclear weapons. And as you're saying, missiles, it did in 2006, 9, 13, 18, 17, sorry, and then again, 21, 22. So the number of times it has tested, people were beginning to get used to the testing. But this time it has reached a notch of escalation, which is much higher. In fact, it has got everybody in the region also very worried. Until now, South Korea and Japan were concerned, but were taking it in their stride. But the current round of missiles, where North Korea tested various ranges, largely the short-range ballistic missiles, but besides that, the ICBM and all kinds of technology, it had got both South Korea and in the waters of South Korea. It was very close to, it was targeting Ulleung-do, meaning it targeted very close to Ulleung-do, and Japan was forced to announce evacuation. So the situation has escalated. And it justifies, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un justifies this and blames it on the current vigilant storm exercise, aerial exercise, which in itself was resumed on such a large scale because of the North Korean missile threat that they felt was imminent. This time, the scale of the vigilant storm, it involved thousands of airmen, and they did about 1,600 sorties. All these are there for everyone to see. And not only that, I think the Royal Australian Air Force also deployed a refueler plane for the purpose. So, and thousands of personnel, naval, Marine Corps, everybody was involved. So North Korea justified it. It always looks for reasons. It's not that it would not have tested its missiles once they were ready without any provocation, but it gives it an excuse. And then there is a blame game. Like, you were responsible, you were the ones at the negotiation table. They have an upper hand in saying it was the vigilant storm that provoked us and we tested. But North Korean leaders have their own agenda, have their own objectives. For one, they make sure that they are noticed. Look at us, we are discussing them. Like us, hundreds and thousands of think tanks all over the world are discussing this issue. The policy makers, strategists, everybody is wondering how to get around this problem. So they have certainly achieved one major objective of staying relevant, of making sure they don't fall off the radar, that everybody notices them. The second objective is it has never discontinued any of its production or processing of its nuclear weapons or missiles or fissile material. It has continued with that despite the negotiations that it has had with the US and with other parties. So clandestinely, or it has at most only frozen them. So it has continued, and every time it reaches a level, it wishes to test its nuclear weapons for the completeness of them, for the sophistication, to see their workability. So it did that. That was one of its objectives. And then also to show to the international community that we are there and these are our capabilities. So please don't ridicule us. Don't take us less seriously. We are capable of doing harm and we have the wherewithal for it. And then it also displays its wares to the non-state actors. It has in the past also traded its technology. That is one major source of income for it, foreign exchange. That is one area it is way ahead of South Korea. There is no way it is going to let that aspect slip from it. South Korea is way ahead economically. It is way ahead in every respect. But this is one area where it doesn't depend on any of its allies anymore, not Russia, not China. It has its own. And to answer your question, Ambassador Tayal, they have the capability of producing. They do have the capability of trading clandestinely the technology with each other. Some come out in the open, like the AQ Khan thing that we got to know. Some we don't get to know about. And they indigenously do produce a lot. They divert most of their the money that they get or through trade, through such things, into researching on these aspects. And in the past, they have benefited. Their engineers were trained in Moscow and later on in Beijing. But it was basically Moscow scientists who trained them in the initial years. So they do have the capability of producing their own. So they display their wares to the non-state actors. Third, another objective is this is a way of cocking a snoop at the US, saying you can keep imposing sanctions. You refuse to remove those sanctions, please go ahead and impose some more, because we've tested. But there is nothing you can do, because those sanctions, there's no sanctity, in the sense that sanctions are only in written form. Where can they implement it? No, the interception in the waters is illegal. At most, you can keep a surveillance. You can monitor and see who, from which ship to which ship, things are being traded. But at most, but there's nothing, no hold over them. So they are cocking a snook at the US, which, with due diligence wants to do everything and gets into the same act and, does whatever in its capability, but is not able to think outside the box. And at the same time, it is able to show to China that it can have its own dealings with the world, that with the US, with the world, and there is no amount of pressure from China that is going to help. So this is pretty grave situation as things go, but they are in a very good win-win situation for themselves. They fulfill all their objectives by it, whereas the international community, whereas the US is the one that is, I don't know, doesn't seem to be getting very much out of it. All the efforts made by US so far, they've gone through periods of crisis, through stalemate, through progress. The little progress that each time they've made has been very tentative, where it's all agreements have been nullified, all agreements have been breached, and they come back to square one, but at a higher level of the crisis. So it's spiraling with nothing that US has achieved and everything that North Korea has achieved. They've done, US has tried all that it could. They've had bilateral dealings with it, starting from the Geneva Accord, soon after the discovery of their nuclear weapons program. They've gone into multilateral talks during the six-party talks. They've tried trilateral involving South Korea, North Korea, and themselves. But only thing that happens is rhetoric. There is rhetoric, aggression, and they calling each other. During the Trump period, it was one notch higher. It had become such a joke with the international community, with Trump calling him a rocket man and saying he's a maniac, and I'm going to tell China to get rid of him or do away with him, and he calling Trump as a deranged dotard or something like that. Yeah, so they were name calling, but the US is stuck on one thing. They are stuck on CVID, complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization or dismantlement. But yes, you're right that South Korea now is talking about arms control, because North Korea will not take it. They laughed it out. When the US kept repeating CVID, and then this is nothing short of that is acceptable, Kim Jong-un in one of his talks said, okay, then we are also stuck on CVID, which is of your hostile policy, complete, verifiable, irreversible dismantlement of your hostile policy towards us. So give us that CVID as well. So it's not getting anywhere. Everybody, people involved, need to think out of the box. And only thing that positive that seems to have come out of all this is that at least South Korea and Japan are now talking together against a common issue, and they are cooperating with the US. And still, notwithstanding the opposition lawmakers who are not happy about it. They are not happy that South Korea is dealing with Japan, which has a lot to settle with South Korea, historical issues. So the opposition is not happy about it either. So that seems to be the only positive that seems to be coming out of this. And North Korea is in a very happy situation, and US is stuck where it is. And in the region vis-a-vis Russia and China, their hands are bound. Maximum that they are doing is their power in the UN SC by not letting anyone impose the resolutions or the sanctions on them any further. But other than that, I don't know what the situation is. We need to all think out of the box for a solution. There are no answers, but there are possibilities which we can discuss during the Q&A perhaps. Thank you. With that, I stop here.
Thank you, Professor Raghavan. You rightly said that North Korea has shown a justification for these tests, and yes, it is being noticed. But this point, whether it can again have clandestine links with, maybe not with Pakistan, with Iran. Iran is now also in play and being backed by China and Russia.
Yeah.
And there were reports that perhaps North Korean 122mm shells are being supplied to Russia by train, which are being used in Ukraine.
Yeah,
they will get something in return. Certainly, they will get something, strategic interest in return. And yes, US has turned out to be rather impotent in all this activity. They don't know what to do. They have tried everything. And ultimately, CVID is not going to happen. So at what stage United States and the West accept reality and treat North Korea as a nuclear weapons power? And then what would be the reaction of South Korea and Seoul? All these questions. Thank you very much. Dr. Jojin John, floor is yours.
Thank you, Ambassador Dayal. And at the outset, let me thank ICS for organizing this event, this very relevant event at such a short notice. And thank you, Professor Raghavan, for laying out the context and highlighting a few points so that I can actually make my presentations without much effort. As the two speakers highlighted, I mean, the security situation in Korean Peninsula is very tense. Let me try and share only one slide. I mean, if I can possibly to do it. Let me see. My system was keep on crashing, so that I had to switch to a mobile phone for making my presentation. If I could, let me see if I can do it.
Sir, you are on mute.
So anyway, let me. What I was trying to show was a graph which shows the number of tests in every year. So that, and also the different the kind of missiles that the North Koreans were testing, so that to get a picture what actually we are talking about. So as Ambassador Dayal pointed out, I mean, this year we had a record number of tests by the North Koreans, and they also this year also we had a few, at least 3 or 4 intercontinental ballistic missiles which North Koreans had not been testing for the last 4 years, particularly after 2018, as a self-imposed moratorium. So they broke that pattern also and started testing the ICBMs, which in a way is a message to the Americans. So what I try to do is to, while the North Korean missile just gets immediate attention, it's also important to understand the changing environment, the context in which such action is happening. So perhaps the changing the environment is important to locate what is happening, understanding the environment. So, well, as mentioned earlier, what we are witnessing is the the end of the post-2018 peace process. So the fragile peace that had established in Korean Peninsula over the last 4 or 5 years is no longer there. And it's also reflective of the change of political actors, particularly in South Korea, as well as in US, as mentioned by the previous speakers, and the UN administration's hawkish approach, and the Biden administration, a new version of what we refer to as strategic patience. All the Obama administration's format, not giving priority attention to the North Korean nuclear issues, responding to situations as and when they come. Well, also reflective of the strengthening of the US-ROK alliance into more a confrontational posture than the previous engagement posture, as mentioned by Professor Raghavan. Well, and also the immediate context is the military exercises, and as Professor Jayati Raghavan, and also the regional context is also very important, as the US-China confrontation and the US-Russia confrontations. North Korea sees that it can get away with any kind of international sanctions. I mean, as you see, the United Nations could not bring about resolutions, or even they could not conduct a meeting on this particular issue because of the differences or the conflict between the great powers in the UN Security Council. And I will also, and there's a change in North Korean approach, which I will explain later on. So, well, I mean, what I try to do is in the presentation is, so what does actually the current event and provocation tell us about the North Korean foreign policy? Well, I would argue that it suggests a major departure, a fundamental shift in North Korean foreign policy. What we are witnessing is sort of an ending of a 3 decades of approach that includes, 3 decades of approach that includes an attempt to normalize relationship with the United States, and sort of what it was doing for the last, that they were keeping a distance from China and Russia. So what we are witnessing is the North Korea is pivoting towards China and Russia. And in the previous 3 decades, North Korea was sort of using the US as a buffer against its relationship with China and Russia. So that no longer seems to be the case. I mean, it's and we have witnessed that over the last few years, and over the summer of 2022, the North Korea making statements and backing the Chinese and Russian positions on various issues, particularly Taiwan and the Ukraine crisis. But it's also reflective of a change in North Korean worldview. I mean, if one were to pay attention to the Kim Jong-un speech in September early this year, he made the statement that the world, a change from a unipolar world advocated by the US into a multipolar world is accelerated significantly. In the same speech, he also mentioned about what one would call as the sort of change in North Korea's approach, particularly with respect to the nuclear or the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula as far as North Korea is concerned, or the negotiation that's on the dialogue format of that. So Kim very categorically mentioned that there will never be a denuclearization first dialogue, or there will be any negotiations to this end. So he also go on to say that our generation will not pursue an immediate visibly improved environment for economic life at the cost of giving up the nuclear weapons. So that particular law that North Korean parliament was enacted in September, as Ambassador Dayal pointed out. I mean, this is a clear departure in terms of North Korean position on denuclearization issues, and this. Well, I mean, it's just reflective. This has been evolving since the Hanoi failed summit, and in a way, perhaps if one were to read carefully about the North Korean literature, it will not come out very clearly. But it seems to have lost all the expectations, and sort of a face loss for Kim Jong-un at domestic political one sense or the other. so it will not. He will not take the risk again in this particular direction. So what we are witnessing as far as North Korean foreign policy is concerned, we seems to I would argue that there seems to be an end of an era which starts with the 1990s, the agreed framework, which North Korea trying to sort of seen as an opportunity for normalizing relationships, starting with Kim Il Sung, then to Kim Jong Il, and Kim Jong Un, and that seems to be ending. So, in that sense, the real significance of the recent developments goes beyond the North Korea simply joining the anti-West bloc led by China and Russia in a way that some would call it a new Cold War. But it also signals a fundamental shift away from North's 30-year policy of non-alignment, sort of distance relationship with China and Russia, and an effort to normalize relationship with the United States. What are the implications, regional implications? I mean, as mentioned earlier, the regional security situation in East Asia is highly securitized, and also, I mean, it's I don't think we will likely to see any international cooperation on North Korean belligerence anymore. I mean, at least in the immediate future. And the second aspect is what we are witnessing is a move in direction of a northern and a southern security triangle in East Asia. The northern being the China, Russia, and North Korea. The southern being the US, Japan, and South Korea. So you're seeing a kind of revival of a Cold War type, if not Cold War type, but something similar of that kind. So what it intensifies the security dilemma in East Asia and further intensify the arms race in East Asia, which including the nuclear agenda, or the nuclear envelope, so to say, which has already been going on for quite some time. Be that the normalization of Japan, or the increasing defense spending by the Chinese, the debate in South Korea, or for that matter, in our region. I mean, what we're witnessing is a significant arms race and a security dilemma, which will push us in a direction where it's impossible to have any kind of cooperation on other kinds of issues as well. Well, what does it actually imply? Its implication for Indo-Pacific and India. As mentioned, it's going to be a highly securitized regional environment. Well, I mean, and the perception of the Cold War and perception of a both politics of a Cold War type will accelerate and further increase the regional fragmentation and perhaps the regional cooperation agenda, including the economic agenda, will be sidelined in some way or other. And from an Indian perspective, sometimes it will be difficult to pursue and the multi-alignment foreign policy that we have been trying in some sense. There will be, we could expect some awkward moments where we will be pressured to take positions on issues that come up in the context of this North Korean security issues. I'll stop here. Looking forward to have discussions. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. John. Yes, UN Security Council is paralyzed and nothing is likely from there, either positive or negative. Then, yes, it seems that North Korea is now trying to change the ground rules on which future negotiations will be held and with United States. In the last 20-30 years, whatever they did, as Professor Raghavan also said, they used this time to keep on increasing their nuclear capacity as well as the missile launch capacity, spiraling up. So they have this confidence now that they have reached certain stage where they can come out in the open. And they seem to be, yes, coming closer to China and Russia. But it was always believed that North Korea has, or the leaders, at least his father and grandfather, had an independent streak. And they were not really totally following the Chinese line, and they had their own issues and their own perceptions. But so, is it a Cold War type of alignment taking place? Maybe that is, and then India will have to perhaps react in some way if it is uh, China, North Korea, and somewhere in the periphery also Russia. So thank you very much, both. May I ask one question from both the panelists, one by one, if they could respond? That North Korea is a nuclear weapons power. I think we can all agree that it is all semantics or formality or international law, but they have the capacity, they have the delivery capacity also. But is there capacity only for regime survival, and it will come into play only if there is some tension in North Korea South Korea relations, or is it a capacity which can come into play in the larger Northeast Asia and Indo-Pacific? Specifically, suppose there is some tension over Taiwan between United States and China. Do you think North Korea will be coming out openly in support of China? They can do it in different ways. Fire 2 missiles over Japan, and suddenly Japan's preoccupation would be with North Korea rather than with Taiwan. So how do you think things could pan out? You know, as think tank, we can always do some crystal gazing. Professor Raghavan first, and then Dr. John. You are on mute.
Good question, Ambassador Tayal. Yes, they have all the capabilities. Now, whether that is only as a deterrent or whether they will actually use it is something that I would not even sort of want to go into. Because it's a very,
I mean, you know, just so that it comes into play.
Yeah, yes, that's right. But like I said, they certainly want to display their capability to the people, to the non-state actors and to the underworld, that they have this capability, not only to them for sale and for earning foreign exchange, but also to the world, where the US now thinks twice. Otherwise, the way it was able to, sort of wheedle out Osama, it can do, it could have done a lot more anywhere. I think it's capable of doing in Saddam Hussein, or for that matter. It can, but it, because of its ally, with close proximity of South Korea to the region, of its own soldiers in the region, because of the fact that North Korea possesses this weapon, it is a major deterrent for the other powers. Whether it is a deterrent for North Korea or not is $1 million question. Whether they will use it in the event of China getting involved with Taiwan is something that is difficult to predict. But as you rightly said, they could, if they feel that China, if their relations with China are continue to be as good, which they've always been. They've depended on China, and they've got all their aid. They've got everything from China so far, and they've survived. So in that event, yes, they could, to distract Japan from the issue. They could fire some more into the Sea of Japan, get Japan involved in announcing evacuation and evacuating their own people while China is involved. That's a very great possibility, and we could think on those lines, and I'm sure policymakers must be also thinking of the various scenarios that are possible in that situation. But as of now, they certainly feel that their arsenal is complete. They felt their arsenal was complete in 2018. That is when they decided to then, after all the testings in 2017, they felt now they were ready to discuss, negotiate, and with South Korea, and they extended their hand of friendship to South Korea. But again, that went awry with Trump. That was the best time when something could have been achieved. But I differ from Dr. Jojin John when he says that end of normalization of relations with US, 3 decades, 30 years normalization. But that also was just a way of negotiation that North Korea used. It had no intention of normalizing relations with the US. Initial years, perhaps it was threatened by the US. It was really very frightened that with the US soldiers being so close to the border, it was threatened. But as years went by and it kept developing, and it could see what the usefulness of these nuclear weapons and technology, it stopped worrying, and it didn't. Its very raison d'etre is the US and South Korea. So it will not want a situation where, meaning normalizing relationship with US would mean end of its own regime. It would mean, a union of the two halves, but perhaps more on the US terms, because US being the greater power in the world. And so I don't know whether, the intention in all these 3 decades was also ever to normalize relations with the US. So to that extent, my views are a little different from yours, Georgie. Nothing more to add to that.
Dr. John, what is your crystal gazing?
Well, it's a very difficult question to engage with, but let me add this by saying that, as ma'am pointed out, I mean, what happened between 2018 when Kim Jong-un announced that the nuclear state force has completed, and what happened after that, what they were doing was to perfect their nuclear delivery system, as well as the miniaturization of the nuclear of the nuclear arsenals, so that can be used for tactical purposes. I mean, perhaps if one were to look at Kim Jong-un's speech in 2001 Party Congress, there was an emphasis on developing tactical nuclear weapons, and Hwasong 15 missile, which the North Koreans are developing at this point of time, well, is sort of advancing that delivery capacity in a way that having with a capability of reaching over to the 15,000 kilometers range, and which has an ability to carry multiple warheads. So that's which is not simply minimum deterrence that the North Koreans are trying for, but they are expanding. Well, there seems to be an attempt change in the North Korean nuclear doctrine also, as Ambassador mentioned about the new nuclear law that they have revised in 2000, so September early this year. Which also suggests that there has been significant thinking in North Korean approach and its nuclear policy. I mean, it's not just simple deterrence, but also for tactical purposes. Right. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. John. Now we'll have Q&A. A couple of hands have been raised. Sugandha, may I request you to conduct it from here, Q&A, and also keep a look, have a look on the chat box also if there is anything. Sugandha, please go ahead.
Sir, I see there are 2 raised hands. Perhaps people could ask the questions. Sir, you're on mute.
Sugandha, are you taking over? Akshat Ben, you have raised your hand. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Akshat Beni. I'm a research intern at the Institute of Chinese Studies, and I'm a student of Japanese studies. So if I may bring out the Japan factor in my question. Given that North Korea's belligerence poses a common threat to both South Korea and Japan, and by extension to American interests in the region, I would like to bring out the existing historical bitterness between South Korea and Japan and how it potentially affects policy on both ends. And would you say that one of the primary concerns for the US and its policy of multilateralism through bilateralism in the Indo-Pacific is centered on this said bitterness between South Korea and Japan, and that it could potentially hamper any effort to counter North Korea and by extension China?
It's a very good question. And really, if you are in Japan or you are in Korea, you see it is very palpable. The negative vibes between the two countries, and it keeps changing. Of course, President Yoon is now trying to have some more via media. So, Dr. Agwan, Dr. John, please, your comments on this question.
Yes. Yes, we are right. It's really worrying, the kind of relationship that Japan and South Korea have had. In between, there were periods of very cordial relationship between both of them. And then suddenly in 2018, there was a judgment, the Supreme Court judgment in South Korea, where they wanted more compensation for the comfort women issue. And so that escalated things. And then because the COVID situation, as it is, had made trade and production of the microchips that they used to export to South Korea, that had stalled. So things had become pretty bad on the economic front also. And then to add to that, because of this reason, they did not, because of the political reason, they did not find a reason to normalize their economic relationship either. They did not find ways of overcoming this. And it just kept escalating, and it has each leader in their own country plays out to their own public as well, citizens. They may think differently, but the citizens strangely, they are riled about the fact that they divided opinions. In South Korea, you have one lot who feel that the relationship with Japan should be normalized, but the larger lot are the ones who feel that the compensation needs to be right before anything can be discussed. And on matters like this, even security issues are targeted. They stopped exchanging intelligence reports, and they ended the GOSMA, the understanding that they had gone through, saying that they would, exchange intelligence reports about North Korea. They stopped that. So it is rather foolish and quite childish. And I think I have also in my own way written about this, that there are ways of overcoming these differences. It's not as though they've not apologized in the past. It's not as though the compensations were not agreed upon and settled in the past, but to be raking it up over and over again, saying that what was discussed earlier remains, it was not appropriate. These are issues that can be done on a one-to-one amongst leaders instead of making it a national issue and affecting the security in the region and making it difficult for any kind of a multilateral cooperation in the broader region is my take as well. Yes.
Yeah, I agree with you, Professor Raghavan. Dr. John, you would like to add something?
Well, I mean, Japan Korea relations is very much part of South Korean domestic politics. I mean, so it would be difficult to overcome because, I mean, the progressives has a different view on the issue because it's Japan becomes, or the Korea-Japan relations become part of the progressives' equations with the conservatives, given the fact that it's part and parcel of the reconciliation process in South Korea. So politics is always local, so it's difficult to overcome that sentiments. But there is also a sense within Korea of taking a practical cooperation with Japan, and so in that sense, the UN administrations have tried their level best to reach out to Japan and also to strengthen the US-Japan Korea's trilateral relations. But it's difficult. I mean, there are hurdles that needs to be overcome, and it also has to do with the Japan. Also, the Japanese domestic politics. It's impossible for any Japanese politician to make concessions and appears to be weak. And it will be political suicide at home for any Japanese leader to do it at home. So, but it's a challenge. But the securitization of issues in East Asia perhaps would give levy to overcome some of the historical issues, if not in the long term, but for in the short and medium periods. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Maliakal, please go ahead with your question.
Thank you.
Unmute yourself, please.
Sir, I've asked you to unmute.
You will take over now, Sugandha?
Yes, sir, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, please.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
I think Ambassador Gonzalez has joined. So welcome, sir. And I think you are one of the very few diplomats who actually met Kim Il-sung.
Oh.
So if you could share something about that, that would be great.
Yeah, that would be nice.
But Professor Maliakal first.
Thank you. I just remembered, and I just came back, and I did meet Captain Kim Il-sung a very long time ago. But I have very faint memories of that. It was somewhere in the 60s, 70s. That's 50 years ago. But I'm sorry. What way can I enlighten you?
Can Japan and South Korea come really close sometime and forget these historical animosities and perceptions, and they still, the baggage is still very much there on both sides, and it affects the security of the whole region.
No, that's been a constant for so long. I mean, it goes back, I think, to the sort of colonialization which Korea endured, and then during the war there were very, very difficult times for the Koreans under the Japanese. And I don't know. Nevertheless, the fact of the matter is that the Koreans have modeled themselves on the Japanese and have achieved a sort of economic growth is admirable. I mean, in some ways we forget that because when we look at the Chinese or the Japanese, but the Koreans, in a sense, have probably done both of those. Because they are now, I find, supplying weapons to the Koreans almost better than almost anybody else. And of course, we know the Chaebols and the Samsungs and the rest of it. And all this the Koreans have done, of course, with the help of the West, the help of the Americans and so on. But very largely under the tutorship of the Japanese. So I do know that there is an animosity, but I frankly don't really understand why they maintain it. It would be much easier if they join together and particularly with the present state of China. But then, I mean, we also in our neighborhood have not done so well. So I don't know that we should try to give people too many lessons. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Professor Maliakal, please go ahead. And after that, Sugandha, you take over.
Thank you, Dayalji, because I wanted to raise only 2 points. First of all, thanks to Vaijayanti and Jojin for bringing a lot of points to the discussion. My 2 limited points are, one is, I think this also shows the limitations of the sanction regimes in the international relations. If you take the issue of North Korea or now Russia, the sanction diplomacy has a limitation. I think we need to understand that the affected country, if it is ingenious enough and it has wherewithal, it can withstand. And secondly, the nuclear weapons itself, I think we have to take a relook at it, whether it is the experience of in the West Asia, few countries tried, but I don't want to get into that. But if the logic that only few countries can keep the weapons, rather, I think the disarmament, we have to go back to that discussions as well. And North Korea, even though it is a small power, it has shown that how they can beat the sanctions imposed by larger states and how to manipulate the forces deployed around them, rather than being a point of strength or using it as also pointing out the vulnerability to the powers that way. And I think already Ambassador just now pointed out the relation between South Korea and Japan. It is not going to be that easy to solve. Okay, we may wish, but their cultural differences, their experiences in the Second World War, I think that is going to haunt them for a long time to come. Thank you.
Sugandha, you are on mute.
Okay, so next question. So we're taking the last question because we are running out of time. Shubhadeep, you're next. I'm asking you to unmute.
Yeah, Sugandha, thank you. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So my question is regarding the US approach to Korea. So I just wanted to know whether US approach to Korea has changed over the administration. If so, then what changes can we see in terms of approach from Biden administration to its previous administration? Yeah, that's one question I have. Thank you.
Okay, I think I'll just make a comment. Yes, Professor Maliakal, the limitations of sanctions has always been clear. You can look at Iran also. There have been very serious sanctions against it and it has suffered. But if a country and its people have enough resolve to withstand those suffering, but even then keep on going to whatever is their strategic objective, then sanctions they can withstand. But if the people do not stand by the regime in following their strategic goals at the cost of their living standard, then there is a problem. And I think in different ways, because they are not democratic or authoritarian, whatever, but the countries have been able to withstand sanctions, even South Africa. So yes. And US approach to, I think US just wants to get North Korea in some ways and make some noises. Now US is totally occupied with Ukraine. So in the timeline, I would say that Kim Jong-un has very clearly assessed that this is the time to come out in the open and do whatever it wants to do. And there is no question of any real reaction from United States and its allies. And the whole agenda is being controlled by Kim Jong-un. You have seen even earlier, even 2018, he was controlling the agenda. and giving some olive branch to Trump, and then all those meetings took place. And when he did not get what he wanted, he then stopped the whole process. So America is reacting to whatever is the North Korea is doing. But there were some reports that President Trump had once said that if Japan wants to go nuclear, why should US stand in the way? Now, by all indications, if Trump comes back again, or God knows what is happening in the United States, then so what? How much leeway US is prepared to give both to South Korea and Japan to develop their own independent deterrence against North Korean nuclear capacity? That is a very difficult question to crack, but questions are being asked. Professor Vajanti or Dr. John, you would like to say more on this?
Yes. About the sanctions regime, yes, it is pretty ineffective. Sanctions regime only sort of puts a hindrance on some kind of a trade and other exchanges. And they're not, North Korea is not allowed to export any of their coal resources, which is their main. But it also ensures, the humanitarian aspect of it ensures that they get their minimum 500,000 barrels of petroleum. It's not as though not a drop goes into the country. North Korea survives on the minimum. They are willing to survive. The human rights activists ensure that people remain unaffected. So the world is a kind place. They are so kind to everybody, and they mete out the same treatment to North Koreans as well. And the leaders are quite happy as long as they get their minimum and they can divert all the money that they get through their other clandestine activities into production of nuclear weapons and missiles. They are happy. Any kind of interdictions in the seawater of ships is illegal. You can at best only monitor, like I had said during my presentation. So absolutely right that the sanctions regime is not a solution. Regarding proliferation by the US, meaning it's NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, ensured that no one else besides the P5 would the five would have the nuclear weapons, and no one else would. Whereas North Korea, we tested, every world over knows that India and Pakistan do have nuclear weapons. We have, I can speak for ourselves, we've conducted ourselves very responsibly. But now the world knows that North Korea has, all the while it has been looking for recognition. And the US has been stuck on its single point agenda of non-proliferation. Non-proliferation, we cannot recognize yet another, if we do that, then we end up recognizing many more. We'll have to end up recognizing others as well. So some solution has to be found in saying that, yes, you do have nuclear weapons, and maybe at the negotiation table, sort of tell them we recognize you as a nuclear weapon state, but don't make an announcement of it or whatever. But that, again, has not happened. So North Korea continues. And if Japan and South Korea start, meaning if the next administration, if Trump administration comes back and permits them, then what is there to stop? Meaning that it goes, the same argument goes that US does not want any other country to be recognized as nuclear weapon state and will not. So I don't know how they will, round that square or whatever the expression is. So it is a difficult situation. I don't think they can permit Japan and South Korea to produce their own nuclear weapons. North Korea would say, we have one, please recognize us also there as nuclear weapon state. So that is my take on the issues so far.
Thank you, ma'am. Jojen, sir, would you like to go ahead, or we have two more questions?
All the answers, the questions have been addressed by Ambassador Dayal and Professor Raghavan. Let me add one point, and this is on the issue of Japan-Korea relations. And since Ambassador Gonzalez also mentioned about this, well, I mean, sometimes we forget the fact that this Japan-China and Japan-Korea historic issues became a major political issue since the 90s. I mean, before that, this was not a real issue between the relationship between the two countries, and it has to do with the Korean national identity discourses, and for a Korean national, the core of the Korean national discourse, identity discourse, Japan becomes a significant other, and it becomes very difficult to reconcile that aspect of the relationship. And it's also important to recognize that there is a status competition, particularly in South Korea, because I mean there's a tendency to compare Japan in its national identity debates and also competition and also status competition between Japan and Korea. So it's not easy to get away with this, even though there might be tactical and practical cooperation on security issues, but it's a very deep issue. So it's not that easy to resolve politically. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So we have one question in the chat box. This question is from AGR on our YouTube channel. So he's not mentioned who is he addressing the question to. So any of us can take it. Can we observe these events as threat signaling than an actual intention of strike, especially at a time when economic turmoils are too hard to ignore, even for Kim? And second question is from Akshat.
Yeah, on this, yes, I don't think Kim Jong-un is trying to strike any country. It is just capacity building and making sure that nobody strikes his country. It is still deterrence, I would say.
Yeah.
I go to the second question, please.
Sir, but
Jordan, please go ahead.
But the unintended consequences of it cannot be predicted, because once a conflict starts, I mean, so the escalation starts. I mean, it's difficult to manage it. That's the challenge that we are facing.
That is
and this
true.
is a challenge that 2018 also. I mean, once there is a lot of misperception and misinterpretation about the acts of one by the other, so it can cause a lot of unintended consequences of these acts. So that's what I'm worried about.
Thank you, sir. So next question is from Akshat. Akshat, I'm asking you to unmute yourself.
Ambassador Tayal, you mentioned a very interesting point of the US potentially, or maybe at some point, giving leeway to South Korea and Japan to develop their own independent deterrence. And since I am researching on Japan as a novel country, independent deterrence does form, at least in some part, a tenet of what normalcy means for Japan. And the Japanese in the last 30 years, both the populace and the leaders, including Junichiro and Abe Shinzo, have shown inclinations towards a more independent Japan, which of course also means at some point an independent deterrence in terms of against both North Korea and China. However, when it comes to South Korea, would you say that the South Koreans, both the population and the leaders, are actually willing to develop their own independent deterrence, that the presence of US troops on South Korean soil is as much integral to the South Korean policy, as against Japan's?
Akshat, you are right. The Japanese people are not ready for any kind of nuclear weapon capacity, and all surveys have revealed that. Even Shinzo Abe perhaps wanted to move in certain direction, he could not. But in Korea, the latest polls by Asan and some other institutes say more than 70% of Koreans who were surveyed, they favor a independent nuclear deterrent capacity against North Korea. And they are just, and you know, but the problem is that they cannot refine, they cannot enrich. They have a lot of used fuel. They have so many nuclear reactors. And their grievance is that the United States has allowed Japan to recycle that fuel and use it, but they have not allowed South Korea to do it. And they are really groaning under the weight of keeping all that used fuel in safe, safe tanks or whatever they do. So, but the public opinion in South Korea, as per the latest polls, is in favor of a nuclear weapon capacity. I think let us close it, Sugandha.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. With this, we would wrap the session, and we would like to thank the panelists for giving us our precious time. The video for today's discussion will be available on ICS YouTube channel. On the behalf of ICS, we would also like to request you to register for our next upcoming conference, 15th AICCS, All India Conference for China Studies, which is from 17th to 19th November. It's on virtual mode. The link is in the chat box, and all details regarding the event can be found in the brochure. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sugandha, for a brilliant emceeing the whole. And thank you very much to all our speakers, participants, chairs. This actually was a very fascinating discussion. I learned really quite a lot, and I thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you, ICS. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ambassador Fayad. Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you, Georgine. Yes. Bye-bye.